and the very reason for the purpose of that section is then destroyed, and their logic fails. So there's only two ways to look at it. Either only lawyers are affected, either it is A if L and only A if L, but not JJ, or it is A if not L plus JJ. And that concept right there translates logically into A if not L. Well, it's right there. Unless you want judicial justices, some of whom are bound by the Act and some of whom are not bound by the Act, the only proper interpretation is in fact A if L, but not if JJ. And it does not say A if anyone except L plus JJ. And that's the truth the Law Society doesn't want you to know, folks. And the reason is, if you interpret it so that it applies to everyone, then they have a whole lot of power over you. But if it only applies to them, they have very little. And there's only those two interpretations. And one of them results in judicial justices not enjoying the judicial immunity, which was the very reason for the exemption in the first place in the whole section. So my position is that the application of the Act, it states very clearly to whom it does apply, and it also tells you the exemptions against whom it applies. And that is the lawyers. It is applicable to all lawyers unless they happen to be acting as judicial justices. But that does not mean it is applicable to everyone, even those who are not lawyers, because then every judicial justice who has never been a lawyer would be subject to the Act, and the logic, it fails. Comes to a screeching halt. Big failure. So in summation, this Act can only be applied to lawyers who are not judicial justices, not everyone who is not a lawyer and a judicial justice. And the reason is, it would be too easy for them to write in that this Act does not apply to a person who is a part-time judicial justice. Then you could argue perhaps that it applied to everyone else. But by the inclusion of both a lawyer and the other, they do then point out that it's only applicable to a lawyer. And supporting that argument is the fact that the other position ends up meaning that there are judicial justices who would be bound by this Act because they weren't both a lawyer and a judicial justice. Either it's only applicable to lawyers unless they are a judicial justice, or it's applicable to everyone unless they're a lawyer and a judicial justice, in which case it is then applicable to a judicial justice who has never been a lawyer. And that means what? You've got some judicial justices against whom they're bound by this, and some who are not. There's only one interpretation that opens the door for judicial justices being treated equally and all of them enjoying the same level of judicial immunity. And that interpretation is that this Act can only lawfully be applied against lawyers, provided they are not members of, provided they haven't been appointed as a judicial justice. I'd be willing to argue with any lawyer out there concerning this. If they want to argue that we are all, everyone who is not a lawyer is subject to this Act, if there's any lawyer out there, any member of the Law Society who wants to argue that people who are not lawyers are subject to this Act, I'd like to speak with them. Pretty sure they don't want to speak to me, though. I like to hang out sometimes at on internet forums and share these concepts that I share.
and get the responses from people. There's one forum I've been hanging out at, the JREF forum, I believe it's called, the Randy Foundation. These people consider themselves to be very critical thinkers. They're probably all very highly educated, very intelligent people, and yet when you look at their responses to this, they claim that the Freeman perspective has been debunked. But when you look at what they consider to be debunking, it seems to be nothing more than a sufficient quantity of ridicule has been heaped upon it. We've called it woo each 25 times, and therefore we've rejected it, and they claim that that is in fact critical thinking. If you go there, some of the people, you'll see some rather funny responses. Their idea of what is and is not the truth is often based upon what the perceived effect would be on their life. And if they don't like the perceived effect, they rule that it can't be the truth merely because it doesn't have a positive effect on them. People who have never read, say, the Income Tax Act will claim that we are wrong for our interpretation of it when we have read it. They honestly claim that if you don't agree or consent to being governed by them, that they have a right to force you to leave Canada because you are not in contract with them. It's kind of funny when you look at some of their responses. One stated that he was disappointed, that he had greater expectations and was disappointed in my response. What's funny about this to me is that here someone is claiming that they are negatively affected by my actions, saying that they're disappointed, but they have previous expectations, and they honestly believe that these expectations create some form of obligation upon me, and that my failure to fulfill the expectations is just reason for his disappointment. And it would never cross his mind for a moment to believe that the disappointment is in fact a result of him having expectations. No, his expectations create an obligations upon others to provide satisfaction. It's an ego out of control, but it is kind of fun to watch.